Memories of a half-forgotten metaphor, prince defecting, leaving the kingdom of evermore, barren land of the man.
Shalosio Yatzarel. It's your brother, your cousin, your nephew, young Aniyun Wiya, reporting live on behalf of the Master of Breath, Isagire Messi. And I'm trying to get you to realize that your law is the truth, not theirs. Listen, guys, what's happening right now, I want to bring your attention to a development over the weekend that is kind of snowballing. What we're seeing here is aggression against Native Americans to further suppress and marginalize the Abo community, and so what has happened over the weekend is a lobbying firm that advocates for the recognition of all Black Americans, or at least all Black Americans who descend from the slave trade, as being predominantly indigenous to this land. A lobbying firm that advocates for that recognition of that truth, of that fact, has come forward in defense of white Native Americans. You're hearing me correctly. Their focal point is Black American Indians. They're coming forward to defend white Native Americans. Are you catching that? And they're defending Native Americans in a situation that I think is that I think is laudable. They're coming forth to defend Native Americans on two fronts, particularly in Utah and in Montana, where we have lawmakers exercising racial prejudice against the Abo community, as it's called, Aboriginal community here in North America, and so that firm is a firm you've heard me mention many times on this channel. Unahia. Unahia is an organization who advocates for that recognition of Black Americans as predominantly indigenous to this land, and Newsbreak has actually reported that Newsbreak is actually reporting that this firm, that Unahia, has basically come to throw its weight behind Native Americans in Utah and Native Americans in Montana. We're going to look at the particulars of these situations to try and figure out what are the circumstances that we're talking about. I'm going to provide some context up front really quickly, but then we're going to go in and get the details. The first thing I want to look at is a statement provided by Unahia. You can go and read the Newsbreak article. I'm providing that link from Newsbreak in the description box, so that anybody can go read that and go check it out. But or if you have the Newsbreak app, it'll take you to that, and you can read the article there. But this is a story that's flying under the radar, and it needs coverage. And what's happening is, I want to look at this. I want us to look the statement, Newsbreak covered the story, but the story comes from a press release, and the press release comes directly from Unahia. The Newsbreak article does not include the full statement that was actually delivered by the chief officer of Unahia. The chief officer of Unahia is Hiloha Naniwaya. You've heard her mentioned many times on this channel. She's even been featured on this channel. She's been seen on this channel. And Hiloha Naniwaya, her entire statement is not included in the Newsbreak article. I want to look at some of what was left out from the article. And we'll catch the lines that they included as well, but I want to look at what was left out. And in addition to that, and so we're going to look at the statement that in fact, we're going to listen to the audio. We're going to listen to the audio of the statement when it was delivered, and so that you can hear that. But just before we do that, I want to make sure that we're able to. I just want to make sure that we're able to look at, because this is the breaking news that we're talking about here, but I want to make sure that we're understanding the context of what she's talking about before we listen to the audio. So real quick, just so that I can give you a brief recap on these stories in case you're unaware, because each of these stories is flying under the radar for pretty much anyone who's not indigenous. If you're not indigenous, you probably aren't paying attention to these things going on, and you may not have noticed because these are underreported stories. Underreported stories because the American public doesn't care that much about Native Americans. That's just the truth. In the United States, people just don't care much about Native Americans. And it doesn't matter what color they are, no matter who they are, they don't care much about Native Americans. It doesn't matter what political party they're a part of, they just don't care that much about Native Americans, so they're not paying attention to the news developments that go on having to do with Native Americans. When it comes to quote unquote black people who are in fact American Indians, but when it comes to our community, they care a little bit more simply because of our numbers. There's so many more of us than there are of them that we kind of demand attention. And when we demand it, they feel pressured to address it. So news media will cover those stories and has gotten in the habit of covering those stories. And as a journalist myself, I can tell you, we lean toward coverage of things that matter more to larger demographics. That's just how it is. And so if the Native American populace is a smaller demographic in your state or in your city, you can expect that they're going to get less coverage of the things that matter to them, right? But those things should matter to us, which is part of where this statement is going with Hiloha Naniwaya. When you see it, you'll see when you hear it, you'll see what I'm saying, what I mean by that. But regardless, let's just take a quick trip down memory lane. We're not even going that far. We're just going a week back. But listen, this is what's going on. I want to start with what's going on in the state of Utah. In the state of Utah right now, there is an effort being led by Republican lawmakers, and keep in mind the state legislature in Utah is majority Republican. In fact, it's not just Republican Party doesn't just have a majority in the Utah legislature. They actually have what's called a super majority in the state legislature, which is exactly what it sounds like. They're beyond just being more than half. They dominate they dominate the legislature to the point that the Democratic representation in the state legislature is almost non-existent. So, so since Trump got in office, you're going to notice that Republicans have become emboldened in their stances against Native Americans because they feel there cannot be any repercussions for these things. And so, what's going on here is in the state of Utah, they're now the state of Utah it actually has a history of suppressing the Native American vote. They have a history of suppressing the Native American vote. The state legislature is fielding a bill as we speak that is very likely to further marginalize the Native American vote by making it even harder for Native Americans to vote, to participate in the electoral process, any electoral process, whether it's the general election or the state or the state electoral processes for electing district representatives, representatives in the state Senate, whatever the case may be. It doesn't matter. They're about to get iced out of that entire process even harder. And we're going to look at the details of how that is in a minute. But that's the gist of what's going on in Utah. And then in Montana, we have an ongoing scandal with one of the two senators of Montana, which is Tim Sheehy. Senator Tim Sheehy, he's actually in trouble right now, but not feeling very much in trouble because he doesn't feel like anybody's really going to hold his feet to the fire, so he doesn't really need to apologize. But the thing he's supposed to be apologizing for is making racially prejudiced remarks about Native Americans right after taking their money in a bunch of Republican fundraising campaigns. So he's disparaging the crap out of the Crow Nation right after taking their money for all the fundraising that was done leading up to the 2024 election, for all that campaigning that was going on. So these are two battlefronts where Native Americans are being made to look completely insignificant. And that's the Republican MO, to treat Native Americans as though nothing regarding them could ever possibly matter. You just don't matter, right? And so that's the problem there. That's what's going on, and we need to look at what the stance that Unahia has taken, and how Hiloha Naniwaya has positioned that stance and has positioned the organization, because it is the right move. So let's go on ahead and get into the audio. We've got a soundbite for the statement. You don't have to just read the part of the statement that the Newsbreak article includes. You can hear the audio here, but I do still encourage you, to go read the full story. Definitely go read the full story on Newsbreak to get a breakdown of how this whole thing is shaking out right now. But yeah, we're gonna. This is, and when you read the article, this is toward the bottom of the article, but definitely I want to blow that bottom portion up. I really want to focus on that, and I want to pull that to the forefront. Let's look. Let's hear this. Let's hear this. We're going to the audio. We're going to the soundbite we've got from the statement delivered by Hiloha Naniwaya. Let's listen.
We want the state of Utah to know that the Apple community remembers the history of Utah and the broken promises of the U.S. government and the racist aggression of the Church of Latter-day Saints. This community is larger than the sum of carded Native Americans in Utah, because indigenous suffrage is also a Black community issue, because Black Americans are predominantly indigenous too. And while that's been a controversial pain point between white and Black people, rest assured that the red bond between us is stronger than the Eurocentric prejudice. And, the stories emerging from Utah and Montana this week are not just about Native American rights. They're about the ongoing struggle of all indigenous and historically marginalized people against racial prejudice and systemic suppression. When one of us is denied the right to vote, we all are denied. When one of us is slandered with racist stereotypes, we all are disrespected. Senator Sheehy owes the Crow Nation a sincere apology, because it's not just the Crow Nation that he needs to worry about if he continues to be silent on this.
So here's the significance of what you just heard. What's really important, the big takeaway for me personally, and that I think should be important to each and every one of you, is that this is a message of unity. This is a message of unity. It acknowledges, even though it's a message of unity, you'll notice that there was a subtle acknowledgement in it of the fact that many Native Americans do not accept us touting our indigeneity, right? Let's bring that to the foreground for a second. When Black Americans say that they are the aborigines of this land, that they are indigenous to this land, when we identify as autochthonous, what these people will do, the Native American community largely will disparage that. Not all of them, of course. There are many of them who do not. But there's a sizable number of Native Americans who feel that we're just trying to steal their identity. That's their opinion. That's how they feel. They feel like we're trying to steal their identity. And that usually leads to a fight, because we know what we know, but they believe that we're just lying. And they're not really trying to dive into our history with us to figure out why it is we feel we can justify these claims. They could care less. And so that incenses us. That enrages us. And we get mad, and we end up fighting with them, and they get mad, and they end up fighting with us. But the message that Iloha Naniwaya is putting forward is primarily saying, hey, we need to bottle that, table that, set it to the side, and work together. We need to put our differences to the side, because while Native Americans don't even fully accept us as being Indians, we still need to stand by our fellow Indian against the paleface, because, and that's really important to me, that's really important. I think it should be important to all of us, because if, in case you haven't noticed, the biggest problem that we have had as American Indians throughout our history, the biggest problem that we have had is the problem of divide and conquer. The only way that the colonizer was even able to seize all of this land and usurp governmental power from the tribal settlements, from the tribal civilizations that were already here in each individual territory, one after the other, was by getting one tribe to fight the other tribe. In the future, I'm going to be doing a presentation to demonstrate to you the fact that Euro-American settlers were unable to defeat us in war without the help, without the aid of other Indian tribes. That's a fact. They just couldn't even do it. They could not beat us without us. Only Indians were able to defeat Indians. And when you look at the massive swath of Indian wars throughout history, you'll notice that no colonizer victory was ever just the settler beating the Indians. That is never what happened. What always happened was it was the settler in tandem with some other tribe defeating another tribe. That is how the battles were decided throughout American history. So we have to recognize divide and conquer is how we got here. That is what happened to us. That is the story of what actually happened to us. And you need to remember that. So in this moment, if you're remembering that, if you are calling that to mind, the ancestors are trying to communicate with us right now to get us to wake up to our identity. We have not fully awakened to our identity until we can be honest and truthful about recognizing who the Native Americans that are recognized as Native Americans really are. We have to acknowledge their actual identity. We have to stop acting like we're unrelated to them and they're just Chinese or something. That's not really what's going on. Yes, there are a few Asian immigrants here and there who worked their way in to the Native American population. Listen, everybody worked their way in to the Native American population at some point. But those cases are few and far between and not at all the story of how the Native American got to look the way they look or live where they live or be the way they are. The Native Americans hold the ancestral ways of our own tribes because they remember. And they remembered because they were not stopped from remembering like we were. And they're related to us because they are mixed. You understand that? They're mixed. Their bloodlines trace back very tenuously, but their bloodlines trace back to the same ancestors that our bloodlines trace back to. However, a larger proportion of their bloodlines also trace back to the colonizers' bloodlines, the colonizers' ancestors. They are mixed, European and American Indian. That's what makes the Native American who they are, okay? But that being understood, and let's not perpetuate any myths about Native American identity. Because it's as simple as what I've just presented to you. I will be doing more presentations about how we can know that this is the case. But I've already done some, and you need to check these presentations out because we don't need to proliferate conspiracy theories about them just being Mongolian. We are Mongolian, so of course they're Mongolian. I've done presentations on how Mongolian we are as well. And you have got to look at the science on this stuff. Don't ignore the science. Stop that. But listen, we see that this is the case, and these people are in fact our kinfolk. The blood ties may not be as strong as the cultural ties at this point because of how much mixing has happened. But those ancestral connections are still what's most important because Native Americans identify primarily as Indians, more so than they identify as European. They don't identify as European that much. They more so identify as Native Americans. They identify as indigenous. So culturally, they are identifying with us. That's what's happening here. Now, when they don't accept us for who we are, that does not mean that we should get petty about it and refuse to accept them for who they are. We don't have time for that. You know why? Because our common enemy is still here. The colonizer is the one who even created this feud between us in the first place. They divided us. their own mixed descendants versus the ones whom they referred to in the literature as the purebloods. Not my words, Andrew Jackson's words. Okay? They were talking about us. And so they know, and I've covered this in previous presentations. But listen, they knew who we were and who they were, and they deliberately wanted to accentuate the dichotomy of the two different types of Indians that they had created by separating those people from us, by separating our own mixed descendants from us. You understand? Those are our mixed descendants. They come from the same ancestry that we come from. So that's what I'm talking about, and that's what Hilo Hananiwaya is referencing in her message. She's talking about the fact that we need to stand behind them and form a united front, because against Native Americans alone, Euro-Americans do not feel threatened because their numbers are small. But against all American Indians, both registered and unregistered, carded and uncarded, recognized and unrecognized, when you include us, this is a huge number that threatens the entire infrastructure of this country. We built it, we can tear it down. We created it, we can destroy it. All right? That is the problem with trying to deal with all of us. They do fear that the Indian will rise up again, especially if the Indian rises up again with a united front. And Native Americans, y'all have to recognize how much bigger you are than you think you are, because your numbers include us. You're with us. You understand? You're with us. And with us, do you understand how large this army is? This army is ridiculously massive. Ridiculously massive. 1/7 of the entire country just on paper. And the paper is underreporting us anyway. Future presentations will address that. So I wanted to look at the audio. We listened to the audio from Hilo Hananiwaya. I want to now go and look at the actual issues that she was addressing, both in Utah and Montana. We'll start with Utah. Let's check out what's going on there. We're going to read an article. We're going to read another article from there real quick. Let's check it out. First thing I want everybody to take note of is the headline. The headline on this, zero in on the headline: Utah was the last state to allow Native Americans to vote. Ending vote by mail will take that right away, advocates say. That's the headline. Then we've got a subhead here saying a new bill would require voters to deliver their ballots or apply to vote by mail in person, requiring an hours-long drive for some Native American voters. So what that means is it'll do one or the other. It'll either require voters to deliver their ballots in person, or it may even require them to apply for vote by mail, for the vote by mail opportunity in person. They'll have to apply in person to even be able to vote by mail. One of the two. So this is what we're actually looking at as what options are being weighed by the state legislature in Utah, and this is a proposal that comes from Republican lawmakers in the state, and so now the article first starts off giving a little background on who those advocates are that were mentioned in the title, in the headline. Who it first gives you that. Once you like right under the byline, for the lead is starting off by introducing the kind of a picturesque description of what Daleen Redhorse would have to go through. Daleen Redhorse is actually one of the advocates in question here. The advocates they're talking about are two women who are both Native Americans, Tara Benelli and Daleen Redhorse. And but yeah, like listen to this. If I'm skipping down a little bit past those first couple of paragraphs. I'm not going to read the lead. I'm not going to read that first paragraph. I'm not going to read the first 3 paragraphs, honestly, because I want to skip down to some things that I think really get to the meat and potatoes of the story. Here it says, to Red Horse and Tara Bentley both deny women who work as organizers with advocacy group Stewardship Utah. A number of election reforms Republican state lawmakers are pushing this year would continue a legacy of discriminating against Utah's indigenous people at the ballot box. Quote, this is just another form of the long walk. Being recognized as a citizen or being allowed to vote, Bentley said, adding, it's that creation of distrust with the federal government that's happening all over again. And those traumas being experienced all over again, end quote. So you see what they're talking about. They're seeing this as a continuation of the U.S. government, this time in the form of the state of Utah, of course, but it's all the same from an indigenous perspective. Whether it's the state government or the federal government, it really makes no difference from an indigenous perspective. The point is that the established authorities, the authorities established by the colonizer, have agreed to things with my people and are now reneging, and in fact are consistently reneging on those agreements. They have a legacy of reneging on those agreements, and in particular, just a legacy of discrimination. Period. Discriminating against Indians, and I hope people understand that. For all of you American Indians out there who still retain your melanin, you still have to recognize that these are our people too, albeit of diluted blood quantum. They are people who have legitimate traumas and grievances to discuss, but they actually have both stories to tell. Ancestrally, they have the story. They bear the weight of the story of the Indian and the story of the paleface simultaneously, and that actually brings up entirely separate traumas that we don't know anything about, and we need to be honest about that too. Okay, so keep reading here, because these are our kinfolk who come from, who descend from our ancestors, but also descend from the ancestors of the colonizer simultaneously, and they have a unique experience, and we need to be supportive of the fact that they are fighting to avoid being stripped of their right to vote or have it be. It's difficult because you have to understand it's difficult for them to be able to vote, and the right to vote, suffrage, is something that people have suffered to attain. You understand that, right? And there are many of you who feel that it is pointless to participate in the electoral process, so you don't want to even deal with it. But the reality is, with everything that you know and have learned about the history of our people, you know more about the political realities of this country than most people. So you, most of all, should be involved in these elections when they come around. If you know who we are, seriously, let's keep reading. It says, among the proposals that Red Horse and Bentley are speaking out against is one that would require that ballots mailed to voters be returned in person and with an ID. under Salem Republican Representative Jefferson Burton's amendment to election law, or House Bill 300, voters would only be able to return their ballots by mail if they first apply in person ahead of the election. You have to apply for the right to even even vote by mail in that circumstance. But you have to understand these reservations, and I'm going to be doing a presentation very, 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 very soon on the history of Indian reservations and how they've come about and how they are, why they are the way they are, and why you don't see many of us on them. I'm going to be doing a presentation on that. But these reservations, by design, these reservations are far from polling sites. They're far from polling sites, and they're far from anywhere that you could deliver these ballots. So they're isolating these people. These people would have to travel a distance that for some of you is tantamount to crossing state borders in order to vote in your own state. The majority of us are able to vote, the majority of us in most states, in most of the places we're in, we can vote without leaving our county. You know what I'm saying? When election time comes around, and that's ideal. That's how it should be. Look at this. Continuing with reading this article here, the bill will likely change as it moves through the legislative process. Right, because there's a lot of, the legislative process usually involves a lot of amendments. There's a lot of checks and balances that this bill hasn't even hit yet. Because this bill that they're talking about, it's truly a proposal in its freshest form. It hasn't. This is the proposal they're talking about. It has only seen first reading. First reading means that it's only been presented to the floor. So it's been referred to committee, I think, but we would have to see what amendments might get proposed to the bill, and it's very likely that some amendments are proposed, but would those amendments be approved? Because again, Republican power in the state of Utah is pretty powerful, and any amendments to this bill would have to be approved, and then the bill would have to be voted on so that it could be approved. So that's the process they're talking about. The bill, so it says the bill will likely change as it moves through the legislative process, but it's unclear the extent to which Utah's universal vote by mail system will be preserved. Utah is one of 8 states, most of which are in the West, where Native American populations tend to be higher, where registered voters receive a ballot and can vote through the mail. From suing to be allowed to register to vote, to fighting for translation of ballots into their language, Utah's tribal nations have surmounted seemingly indomitable barriers to voting. Advocates worry the Utah legislature's current efforts would only erect more. Quote, we've had participation, but now having to take 2 steps back if they're going to do away with the vote by mail, that just makes it harder for the people to really involve themselves in a system that has suppressed them, Benally said. So you see what they're talking about? They're talking about the fact that there's already political realities that bulwark the ability of First Peoples to participate in the electoral process or to vote on resolutions. These are things they're already. This is voting in general is already an area of civil rights wherein the Native Americans in Utah are marginalized. And we do have to look to the history of Utah to be reminded that this is a state that is infamous for its systemic oppression of indigenous people, right? It was actually born out of that and of course all states were, but Utah uniquely displayed some of the utmost Euro-American savagery against the Indian. They always would call the Indian the savage, but I mean, if you want proof of how much more savage the Europeans were, Utah history is one of the best examples of how savage it was. And you cannot tell those stories without talking about the Church of Latter-day Saints, who literally went to war against Indians. Seriously. So you gotta, there's more to this story. You gotta read it on your own. I am gonna provide the link in the description box. But this, and actually it's worth a read because this article does go into a significant amount of the history. It actually goes backward. It works its way backward. This article does. It works its way backward to tell a significant amount of the history, to remind people of just how much the state of Utah has opposed Native Americans at every turn and worked hard to marginalize them. Listen, they wouldn't be doing these things if they didn't need to. I'll expound on what I mean by that in a minute, but this is an article that I would hope everyone would read. The article, again, this article is coming from the Salt Lake Tribune, and it is definitely worth a read. So that's the news coming out of Salt Lake City, and I think I think one of the things that needs to be understood here is that the Cold War between the Indian and the state of Utah has never ended. It is ongoing to this day, and in fact, that Cold War is better described as not just a war between the Indian and the state of Utah, but more so a war between the Indian and the Church of Latter-day Saints. The Church of Latter-day Saints is a sect of Christianity who literally went to war, took up arms on their own accord against the Indian in order to take land from the very people whom they themselves believed to be the descendants of ancient Yatzarel. They themselves, I know that many of you believe that Utah is part of the promised land. I know that many of you believe that. I don't necessarily agree with this theory. This is what I refer to as mirror world theory, the notion that biblical history actually primarily unfolded over here on this side of the world, not the other side of the world. I don't actually get down with that. But I understand where you're coming from. And it's important to note that it's not just you who thinks this. It's not just your theory. The Church of Latter-day Saints agrees with you. They, in large part, not entirely, but in large part, they agree with you. Where they agree with you is that they do believe that Utah was a second Judah. That the Israelites, the Yatzaralim of old, rebuilt their empire there. Now, we're not going to get in a fight about, we're not going to get in a debate about whether this was the first Yatzarali empire or the second Yatzarali empire. Did they come from Asia or were they already here? We're not going to get into that debate. We're not going to get into that. The point is Utah, for many of my people, today, in the awakening, in the revelation that is leading us to return to the sacred fire, to return to the traditions of our ancestors, many of my people consider Utah in its entirety to be sacred land. I mean, there are many sacred lands throughout throughout North America, in my opinion, but I can understand why many of you feel that Utah is the most sacred of all the sacred lands on this continent. And therefore, there is an emotional response here. Hilohanani Waya didn't address that. She did not address that. She didn't go that far. But many of you understand why it might have been necessary for Unahia to address this, because the battlefield where this story is unfolding is Utah, where the Church of Latter-day Saints went to war against the real saints, right? And they took over, and they're still holding and that remains their stronghold to this day. So so that is extremely significant, and so it informs this issue on an emotional and spiritual level right now, because what they're trying to do is ice out what remains of our people in the land, in the sacred land, right? That's what they're trying to do. They see that land in a similar way to how you see that land. Some of you who believe, who ascribe to mirror world theory, they see it kind of similar to how you see it. But in spite of seeing it that way, they have deliberately positioned themselves as the enemy of the Yatzaralim, the enemy of the chosen people, the people whom nature chose to lead humanity in knowing how to live life, in knowing how to exist on the planet. So that's the issue there, spiritually speaking and emotionally speaking, right? And so politically speaking, we do need to also recognize that the Church of Latter-day Saints is an institution that runs the entire state. It is not just the Church of Latter-day Saints. It's the Mormon state. Utah is the Mormon state, the state of Mormon. That is what it is. It is an ideological isolate, a socio-political isolate, an island separate from the rest of the country because of how Mormon it is. Now, of course, that Mormonness does trail into Colorado as well, which, by the way, was also part of this same Yatzar territory at one time. We're talking about the Na-Dene migration, which is so key. That's why you're hearing about Navajo being mentioned here. It's the Na-Dene migration that I've done presentations on. But here's the thing. We need to look even deeper. We need to look even deeper into the Church of Latter-day Saints as being really behind this. They're wielding the state against the Indian because their fight against the Indian has not ended, and they're still trying to get rid of the little bit that's left. That's what's going on there. That's what's going on there. And we can back that up. We're going to look at the stats real quick. I'm not going to read this whole article, but I want to show you this other article from the Salt Lake Tribune so that you can get an understanding of how much power the Church of Latter-day Saints actually wields. Take a look. Here goes another article I want you guys to check out from the Salt Lake Tribune. This is another article from the Salt Lake Tribune that I want you guys to check out. Latter-day Saints are overrepresented in Utah's legislature, holding 9 of every 10 seats. The Church of Latter-day Saints, you guys, they hold 9 out of every 10 seats in the state legislature in Utah. Does that surprise anybody? And what do you think that's about? Do you think that's just by happenstance? This is a Mormon state. You understand? They've established their own state by force. And they wield the power throughout that state. They dominate. They can do what they want. And one of the things they want to do is to marginalize the crap out of the Indian. Their entire religion is based on it. Killing and intermarrying with the Indian. Simultaneously. How do you do both? That's sick. You have to be sick to do both. That's crazy. It's unbelievably crazy. And this is the situation it has led to. Look at this. This is what we're talking about. Look at this. Look at the subhead. How this dominance, particularly among Republicans, influences policy. You seeing that? You see what you're up against? Have you identified your enemy yet? Have you identified your enemy yet? Is what I asked you. I just want to read this article with you guys. I just want to look at this. I just want us to look at this. First of all, read the lead real quick. Mention the supermajority at the Utah legislature, and most will assume you're referring to the overwhelming dominance of Republicans. Well, yeah, sure. Because the supermajority in Utah is Republican, but it's not just Republican. What else is it? Keep reading. But there's an even more lopsided supermajority, one that some say wields even more influence than the GOP, which is the Republican Party, though often in a more under the radar way. What? 89 of the 103 lawmakers to be seated January 19th, with one current vacancy, are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's 86%. Utah's population is 60% Latter-day Saint, according to research by the Salt Lake Tribune. Latter-day Saints also hold 100% of the state's congressional seats and statewide political offices, such as governor. Do you see the power dynamic in this state? The Church of Latter-day Saints is not just a church. It's actually one of the most fringe denominations of Christianity. Fringe meaning what? Fringe meaning most Christians look at Mormons as not being regular Christians. They're abnormal. They're weird. It's not a mainstream denomination of Christianity, but they're trying to change even that. There's now this new reality show, Mormon Housewives of Utah or whatever it's called. And they got that going on, and there's all kinds of new documentaries coming out all the time. Mormons are showing up in pop culture a lot. You'd be surprised how many influencers on Instagram and TikTok are actually Mormon women. Yeah, this is a thing. This is a thing. They're killing the game, and they are creeping up and controlling things, and they've been controlling things for a long time. They've been controlling things for a long time. But Utah is their headquarters. And I mean the entire state. It is one massive Mormon headquarters. That's what it is. That is what it is. And it's significant that it would be Utah in the first place, right? That's significant. Why is that significant? Utah? Y'all know why that's significant. Why is it significant that it be Utah? Why do you think they chose Utah? Why do you think it's named Utah? Why do you think they went after Utah so hard? So hard. Why do they do this? Huh? I know what a lot of you believe about Utah. And the reality is they believe it too. They believe the same things about Utah that you believe. I don't even necessarily agree with any of you, but my point is that they do. For those of you who believe that Utah is it, so do the Mormons. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So when we say Mormons run Utah, we really mean Mormons are Utah. Utah is Mormon. Pure and simple. It's as simple as that. Utah is Mormon, and they are working to eradicate the Indian. That is their mission, and they haven't yet completed their mission, so they're still trying to work at it. The most important thing was to get rid of the purebloods, quote unquote purebloods, Andrew Jackson words, not mine, purebloods first, and now they're working on what Andrew Jackson referred to as the half-breeds, right? We covered where he said these things in a previous presentation where I showed you a study that went over that in a peer-reviewed journal article where we found that in a previous presentation about how the Cherokee turned white, right? Definitely go check that out. But that's the thing. That's the thing. They did this, and they're continuing to do it. They're just getting the same job done. Republicans en masse, though, are pretty much levying attacks against American Indians as we speak, against the Native Americans, and I want to show you. I want you to look at this situation with Senator Tim Sheehy going on in Montana, because it's not just about Utah, it's also in Montana. So there's an attack on the Plains Indians right now. There's an attack on the Plains Indians right now. And I'm hoping that we can all be reminded by Unahia to band together in a situation like this and not just decide or feel like this is not our problem because those Indians are no longer melanated. Don't do that. Don't do that. You can't continue to divide us this way. We cannot remain divided this way. They identify as Indians because that is their cultural heritage, and the blood of Indians does indeed flow through their veins. It is their bloodline, for the majority of them. To a lesser extent than for us, perhaps, but still valid. And we don't want to get bogged down in the blood quantum game that Europeans have established for us, and because the whole point of blood quantum was to isolate the quote unquote mixed blood from us and keep us divided that way. That's how the identities were changed. So look at this. We need to jump into the Tim Sheehy thing because I'm running out of time. We need to jump into what's going on in Montana. Let's actually read that article and get the details on that so we can take a look at what's actually going on. What were the comments that were said? What's disparaging about this? Why is this being viewed as racial prejudice against Native Americans? Let's take a look. Okay, now this article is actually coming out of Charcusta News, which is the newspaper, the premier newspaper of the Flathead Indian Reservation. The headline reads, Native American legislators walk out during Senator Sheehy's speech. Senator Sheehy, mind you, is, and it gives you a photo there of the three lawmakers it's talking about. This is all at the federal level now. This is all at the federal level. Okay, we're looking at Senator Sheehy. Senator Sheehy is in the U.S. Senate, a representative of Montana, a Republican representative of Montana, and these are three lawmakers here. Three lawmakers: Senator Jacinda Morgo, Representative Shelley Fiant, and Representative Jade Suktis, who all walked out during Sheehy's address. He was giving his speech, and they walked out in the middle of that address to make a public display, specifically to draw attention to the fact that that he has an outstanding scandal for which he refuses to apologize. As it pertains to the Crow Nation, we're going to look at what the article actually says about this and how they frame the narrative. It says 3 Native American legislators walked out during Montana Senator Tim Sheehy's speech Monday in response to disparaging comments he made about indigenous people, specifically the Absolute Nation, which we typically refer to as just the Crow Nation. In English, we say that, right? Social media posts pointed to the walkout as a response to Sheehy's refusal to apologize, despite numerous calls by indigenous groups and tribal groups. In a recording from several 2023 fundraising events, Sheehy is heard making remarks that many considered offensive. So when was this? It was in a recording from several 2023 fundraising events. Fundraising for what? For the election. Right? For the 2024 election, fundraising started in 2023, which is not atypical. That's normal. Fundraising started in 2023 so that the campaigning could ramp up in 2024. For those who are elected and would take office or retain their seats in 2025. So this continues to be a problem. The recording from several 2023 fundraising events. That's where Sheehy is heard making remarks that many considered offensive. Referring to the Crow tribe, he said, quote, "I rope and brand with them every year down there, so it's a great way to bond with all the Indians, being out there while they're drunk at 8 a.m. and you're roping together. They let you know whether they like you or not. There's Coors Light cans flying by your head." These are all jokes he's jabbing at the Crow tribe with. Levi Black Eagle, Secretary of the Crow tribe's executive branch, condemned the remarks, saying they perpetuate, quote, "old racist stereotypes such as the outdated idea of the, quote, drunken Indian," end quote. Representative Shelley Fiant, Senator Jacinda Morgo, and Representative Jade Suktis walked out during Sheehy's address. Fiant, a Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes member and former tribal councilwoman, later issued a statement explaining her decision. She said, "Tim Sheehy made disparaging comments about Montana's first citizens, specifically the Absolute Nation. I will not repeat those comments. The Rocky Mountain Tribal Leaders Council called for an apology. He refused. He refused." You see what I'm saying? He's been called out for an apology. This is a thing that's been going on since they've been trying to deal with it since it happened in 2023, right? Later, he falsely claimed he had spent more time on Montana reservations than Senator John Tester. I have never seen Sheehy in my hometown of Arley, while Tester has visited numerous times during his 3 terms in the Senate. Continuing, she says, during an October debate with Tester, Sheehy acknowledged his remarks were insensitive, blaming them on his military background. Then he lied again, saying his words were edited to misrepresent him. So he admitted it was sort of kind of wrong, but then he also tried to say that he didn't really say it in the first place. This is him demurring on every opportunity to apologize whenever the opportunity arises, because he really just doesn't hold himself accountable for actually saying what he said. And the Republican Party doesn't feel like he should have to, because they feel like he should be able to raise money for Republican campaigns from Indians, and Indians should have to take whatever he's got to say to them, because Republicans do not care about Indians. That's all that is, right? That's all that is. Racist, stereotypical lies from a U.S. Senate candidate are not acceptable. Montana's 70,000 tribal citizens are still waiting for an apology. I am one of them. So that's the article. Not a long article, but you can go read it. The link is in the description box. You can check it out. These are things that honestly demonstrate to you, should demonstrate to you who's who. And I'm not trying to nudge anyone toward the Democratic Party and act like the Democrats are just inherently a better party than the Republican Party. You pick your poison with these political parties, and it's high time that our people simply withdraw from both parties and form our own. But withdrawal from politics completely and the electoral process completely is ignorant, and that is not the answer. But what I do want to focus in on here is that what they're dealing with is the kind of problem that we're dealing with all the time, and we need to stop acting like this problem isn't a black issue. It is a black issue. Any disparaging comments, any racist or any racial prejudice aimed at Native American nations, tribal nations, is aimed at us. And you need to own that identity fully, which means you need to stand up for this. This is a civil rights issue right here that black people should be all over. And part of the reason why Sheehy is not being pressed by his own party to have to deal with this is because they feel like it's a small problem, because the 70,000 people that Representative Fiant is talking about, to them is a small number, and they feel like whatever, we'll deal with that later. It's not a big deal. You see what I'm saying? Because they're not backed by us. You know how huge the American Indian population is in this country? When you count everybody, that's the issue. No, they don't want to have to count everybody. And as long as we keep staying separate and not identifying as Indians for real, and not including our relation to the Native American in that identity, we continue to perpetuate the very same divides that led to us being conquered in the first place. This is what led to us losing a lot of Indian wars. We lost Indian wars to other Indians, and that's what the Euro-Americans needed in order for them to win. They could not beat us in war without getting us to beat ourselves. We had to divide so that they could conquer, and they could only conquer behind other enemy tribes. To conquer our tribes, they had to pit tribes against each other. If we unite, do you know how numerous the American Indian is? How huge the American Indian population is in the United States? In the United States? What? Huge. They can't help but have to deal with you need to get up and force them to deal with you. In every socioeconomic and political arena that we can fight them in, we need to fight them. And that's why we need to, you know, people will tell you to pick your battles. We need to pick all the battles. We need to pick all the battles. Because what happened is you stopped fighting. So we're in a Cold War now. And you need to get back into the Indian Wars never truly ended, and you need to reignite them today. You need to get back at it, and you need to be if you want to identify as an American Indian, you need to stand up for these Native Americans and stop trying to call them Mongolian as if you're not Mongolian. We're all Mongolian. What are you talking about? And we need to stand together with these people who are mixed. They are multi-generationally mixed people, but they carry the blood of our ancestors in addition to the blood of the colonizers' ancestors, and they identify more with our ancestral identity than they do with the European ancestral identity. So we need to be standing up for them in the areas where they are marginalized as somehow less white than the other white people. Because are they white? Yeah, of course they're white. But they identify more with their indigenous roots than they do with their European roots, and that is something we need to defend. We need to defend indigenous roots, even when the face of the people being marginalized for their indigenous roots is of a pale complexion. Because see, they wear the covering of the colonizer, and that confuses some of our people and makes us less willing to defend them. And we have to stop that. We have to stop that. Sheehy needs to be scared of this conflict with Native Americans. And one way to make him more scared is for us to all band together and make this a black issue. It is a black issue. And we need to characterize it as such. And we need to let him know that he's up against 50 million people. He's up against a lot of people. Millions upon millions. All right? He's up against a lot of people. So that's the coverage coming from the Charcusta newspaper. And again, the link is in the description. Definitely go check that out if you want to read that again. Be my guest, because honestly, we need to be all over this. We need to be all over this, y'all. This is no different than if any random Republican lawmaker were to refer to the entire black community as a ghetto full of crackheads. That's what this is. That's what's going on here. That's what he's doing. And you need to feel it like that. It needs to hit you like that. You have distanced yourself from Native Americans, even despite claiming American Indian identity. You should be siding with the recognized Native Americans, and you should be empathizing with their experience, because they're actually your people more so than you realize. And they are your ally against the colonizer, even if they weren't. Even if they were lying. Even if all of this was an elaborate conspiracy, a massive cover-up. Even if all of this was part of the faking of the moon landing or whatever. And I'm not coming down on people who believe the moon landing was faked, but even if I'm just saying, even if this was like that, these are still your allies against the colonizer. But it's important to note that it's not like that. They genuinely are mixed with our blood. And so they are our family. Not step siblings, but half siblings. Our blood is in them. Our blood is in them. This is your family. And they need to recognize us that way, but we need to recognize them that way, and we don't need to wait on them to do the right thing. We need to recognize them now. Go on ahead and recognize it. Don't withdraw your recognition because you're sick of them withdrawing their recognition of us. We're the larger group here, so we should be bigger about this. Let's acknowledge them and stand up for them and defend them so that they recognize we're on their side against the colonizer. They'll come around to when they do their research, they'll realize who we are because all the information is out there. That's how we found it. It's not that hard. It's not that difficult. And we need to be inviting them into these conversations so that they can come learn how it is proven that we are who we say we are, because we do have the receipts and they can come check, and there are photographs and there is documentation, and the Library of Congress does document these things, and the British Museum and the Museum of Virginia, many state museums, all of these, there's loads of information out here and loads of documentation out here that can prove our claims, and they can find that, and that's good for when they do. But let's just recognize what's really going on here. Let's recognize what's really going on here, and let's stand by them against the actual enemy. Okay? Utah and Montana. Utah and Montana. There's a front, a battlefront here. Two battlefronts here. And what I like about what I'm seeing is that heavily melanated American Indians are taking the high road to defend the very same Native Americans who very often deny our indigeneity. Taking the high road is the mature approach, and that's what's going to get us where we need to go. Our unity is what's going to break Euro-American oppression. It's going to break the chains of Euro-American. Because you know what's happening to the Euro-American right now? They are divided. They are more divided than ever before. And you should not be participating in their division by trying to figure out whether to be Democrat or Republican. Forget that. You should be withdrawing from both so that we can unite as a people over here. And the Native Americans should be included in that. And then we become the most powerful force in this country by far. Why? Because they are divided. And their division will be their downfall this time. Because there are many white people who will side with us this time. They will be on our side and they will support us. Some of those white people think that they are Native American. And so that's one of the reasons why they're going to side with us. But do you see what's going to happen? I'm telling you what's going to happen. I'm trying to get you to see it. I'm trying to get you to be on the right side of history here, because that's the direction we're actually headed. And what's going to end up happening is there's going to be a bunch of white people who are too liberal to fight us because they know that they're wrong and they want to right their wrongs. So instead they'll support us. And those who stand against us, the Euro-Americans who stand against us, will be too few in number to win. And they will be the ones who get kicked off Turtle Island. That's what's going to happen. If we play our cards right. Be mature about this. Be mature about this. I just wanted to make sure that we covered all of that information. I wanted to get that news out quickly because I know it's underreported and it's probably going to stay underreported. This probably isn't going anywhere in terms of circulation. So I'm just trying to get the spotlight where it needs to be for our people. We need to know what's going on. We need to know and we need to act accordingly. All right. Y'all stay frosty and watch your six because they out here prowling.